November 3rd, 2018. The Rusty Note. A small venue on one of North Hollywood's back streets, a place most people didn't even know existed. No neon sign on the door, no red carpet, just a rusty plaque bolted to the wall, and the muffled sound of a bass guitar seeping through from inside. But that night, not a single one of the 40-odd people in the room knew that in exactly 23 minutes, this stage would host one of the most unexpected performances in rock history, and the person who would deliver that performance was sitting among them right now. Ozzy Osbourne had discovered this place 3 months earlier. The American leg of the No More Tours 2 tour had wrapped up in mid-October, and Ozzy had returned home to Los Angeles. In a career spanning 50 years, he had taken the stage in front of arenas holding tens of thousands, but sometimes he just wanted to retreat to a corner where nobody recognized him. On one of those evenings when he'd told Sharon, "I'm going out for a walk," he'd turned down this street and followed the sound of music. What he found inside surprised him. Walls covered in old concert posters, a low ceiling, a small stage, and up on it, a 4-piece rock band whose name nobody had ever heard. The band wasn't perfect, but they were real, just like those days in the damp basements of Birmingham, when Black Sabbath held their very first rehearsals. From that night on, Ozzy started coming back every few weeks. An old baseball cap, a faded denim jacket, a worn-out t-shirt. In this get-up, he looked like any retired man. Sharon knew, of course. "Ozzy, when are you going to stop wandering around alone in the middle of the night?" she'd said once. Ozzy had shrugged. "Sharon, the big stages wear me out, but I can't live without music. That little place is right in between the two." That Saturday night, when Ozzy settled into his usual corner, there was an unusual commotion near the stage. The Rusty Note's regular band, Midnight Revival, was in the middle of a crisis in the narrow corridor backstage, and nobody in the room knew about it yet. The band's guitarist and founder, Jake Mercer, was leaning against the wall, running his hands over his face. 32-year-old Jake had started this band 6 years ago with his high school friend Danny Parker. It wasn't a big success, maybe, but playing for these 40 people every Saturday night was the one thing in Jake's life that carried any meaning. But now Danny was standing by the door, his face ashen, pressing his hands against his throat, barely able to speak. "Jake, my voice is gone. It's been getting worse since this morning." Jake saw the expression in his friend's eyes. It wasn't disappointment, it was guilt. Drummer Chris and bassist Marco had stepped into the corridor too. Nobody knew what to say. Jake took a deep breath, walked onto the stage, and picked up the microphone. The murmur in the room went silent. "Hey everyone," he said. "Danny's voice gave out on him tonight, so we're here without a vocalist, but we don't want to cancel the night. Is there anyone out there who can sing, who wants to come up on stage? Any style, we'll back you up." Silence. Complete, absolute, almost physical silence. People looked at each other. Nobody moved. Nobody? Not even the shower singers? A few people laughed, but nobody raised their hand. Just as Jake was about to lower the microphone, a voice rose from the back corner of the room. Quiet, but steady, with a heavy English accent. "I could give it a try, if you don't mind." Jake looked up. A man was rising to his feet from the half-darkness where the stage lights barely reached. His cap pulled down to his brow, his denim jacket worn, his posture slightly hunched forward but confident. The man began walking toward the stage. His left hand was trembling slightly, but nobody noticed in the dark. Jake hesitated. The man looked old, and he didn't look like someone about to sing a rock song. But there were no other volunteers in the room. "Of course, come on up. What would you like us to play?" As the old man climbed the stage steps, his eyes swept the room for a brief moment, a reflex honed over 50 years. When he took the microphone in his hand, his fingers felt the coldness of the metal, and that touch triggered something in his body, as if a switch had been flipped. "Do you know Mama, I'm Coming Home?" he said. Jake raised his eyebrows. That was an Ozzy Osbourne song. "We do," he said, nodding to Chris and Marco. Jake began playing the opening chords. The familiar, melancholic intro echoed through the small room, and then the old man began to sing. When the first note dropped into the room, time slowed down. This voice was familiar, weathered, carrying the weight of years, but incredibly familiar. A young woman in the middle of the room brought her hand to her mouth. Jake lifted his head while playing. The cap had slipped back slightly, and the stage light was illuminating the man's features. Jake's fingers stumbled on the strings. In the fragility of a single second, he understood everything. But he kept playing, because a musician's instinct overrides everything else. He looked at Chris. Chris had figured it out too, his hands trembling on the drumsticks, but he didn't lose the beat. Marco was gripping the neck of his basso so tight that his fingertips had turned white. By the time they reached the first chorus, the room had already transformed. Phones had come out, but some hands were shaking too much to hit the record button. Unlike those times when Ozzy Osbourne's voice hid behind thousands of watts of sound systems in massive arenas, in this small room it was completely bare and vulnerable. The fragility in the voice of a man approaching 70 was a detail that would never be heard in stadiums. But here, in this low-ceilinged room, that fragility was as powerful as the song itself. When he sang, "Mama, I'm coming home," those words had stopped being the chorus of a rock song and had become the confession of an aging man, the voice of someone who truly knew what it meant to come home, after a life spent on stages, tour buses, and hotel rooms for 50 years. When the last note of the song hung in the air, for a few seconds, nobody breathed. Then the room erupted. The sound rising from a crowd of 40 shook the walls of that small venue. Jake nearly dropped his guitar. Chris flung his drumsticks into the air. Marco stood frozen at the edge of the stage. Ozzy leaned into the microphone and took off his cap. His long brown hair fell to his shoulders, and that familiar, crooked smile appeared on his face. "You recognized the song, didn't you?" he said, his voice now thick with his Birmingham accent. This time people rose to their feet. A man in the front row had his hands on his head, shouting. A couple in the back were holding each other, crying. Jake Mercer stood in the middle of the stage, his guitar pressed to his chest, trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He had been playing on this small stage for 6 years, and now, standing on that very stage, was Ozzy Osbourne. But nobody knew yet that the real story of that night was only just beginning. Because Ozzy Osbourne hadn't stepped onto that stage just to sing, and Midnight Revival's true story was hidden backstage, where nobody could see. As the wave of applause slowly died down, Ozzy didn't let go of the microphone. He turned to Jake. "So, what are we going to do now? 40 people are looking at us, and it's still early. Will you play one more song with me?" Jake was still in shock. "Mr. Osbourne, we'll play whatever you want." Ozzy raised his hand. "Call me Ozzy. Mr. Osbourne suits my father better. And do you know Crazy Train?" A smile slowly spread across Jake's face. He turned to Chris and Marco. Both were ready. When Jake played the first riff, that small room roared like an arena. The next 45 minutes were the most extraordinary performance the Rusty Notes walls had ever witnessed. Ozzy sang 3 more songs. During Crazy Train, the room danced like mad. During War Pigs, 40 people listened motionless, as if hypnotized. But during No More Tears, something broke. Ozzy's eyes had filled with tears. He paused for a moment in the middle of the song, gathered his breath, and carried on. Not a single sound came from the room. And the real magic wasn't in Ozzy's voice. The real magic was in the way Midnight Revival played. They weren't a professional band. Jake hit a wrong note here and there. Chris's rhythm slipped in a couple of places. But Ozzy had noticed something. These 3 men believed in their music. Every note came from somewhere real. And authenticity was always more valuable than perfection. After the final song, Ozzy set the microphone down and reached for Jake's hand. "You played brilliantly." Jake shook his hand, but his own was trembling. "We played brilliantly? Sir, you're Ozzy Osbourne. That's like a king complimenting a street performer." Ozzy pointed a finger at him. "In 1968, Tony, Geezer, Bill and I were playing in a factory warehouse in Birmingham. There weren't even 10 people listening. But what matters isn't how many people are listening. It's what you feel when you play." Jake couldn't say a word, his lips trembling. Hearing those words from Ozzy Osbourne was something he couldn't have even dreamed of. As the room slowly emptied, Ozzy's eyes kept drifting to the stage, to those old amplifiers and worn-out instruments. Something had caught his attention. When the room was nearly empty, Ozzy sat on the edge of the stage and looked at Jake. "Jake, how old are these amplifiers?" Jake shrugged, but there was a pain hidden in his smile. "The one on the left is 12 years old. The one on the right is second-hand. It cuts out in the middle of a show sometimes." Ozzy nodded. The neck of Jake's guitar was warped. The tuning kept slipping. Chris's drum kit was missing a tom. Marco's bass had a dead pickup. From the outside, these were small details, but for a musician, each one was a battle of its own. "Do you make a living from this band?" Ozzy asked, his voice soft but direct. Jake was quiet for a moment, then began to talk. His voice was nothing like the energetic guitarist on stage. During the day, he operated a forklift at a warehouse company, 6 in the morning to 5 in the evening, 6 days a week. Chris delivered pizzas. Marco worked at a car wash. Danny was a father of 2 and a cashier at a supermarket. What they earned as a band was the $200 a night. The rusty note paid them, and whatever loose change got dropped into the tip jar by the door. "We've been trying to record a demo for 6 years, Jake said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Even the cheapest studio charges $300 a day. For a 6-song demo, we'd need $1,200. That's a fortune for us." He stopped and swallowed hard. Danny was the most upset about not being able to come tonight because of his throat. He's got 2 kids. His wife works nights too, but he takes 2 buses to get to every rehearsal. In winter, if he can't find a bus, he walks 3 kilometers. He loves this stage. We all do, but sometimes love isn't enough. A faraway look appeared on Ozzy's face. 1968, he said slowly. "Aston, Birmingham. I dropped out of school at 15, worked in a slaughterhouse. We held our first rehearsals in Tony Iommi's father's workshop. It was so cold in winter that Tony and Geezer's fingers couldn't feel the strings." Jake lifted his head and looked into Ozzy's eyes. There, in the eyes of one of the biggest names in rock history, he saw his own story. Different city, different decade, but the same story. Ozzy stood up and pulled his phone from his pocket. It was past 11 at night, but Ozzy didn't care. "Sharon, love, listen to me. No, the police weren't called this time." He winked at Jake. "I found a band. Yes, at that place. These kids are really good. They've been trying to record a demo, but they haven't got the money. Their gear is falling apart. But their music is real, Sharon. I've been on stages for 50 years. I know the real thing when I hear it." He hung up and pulled a business card from his pocket, handing it to Jake. On it was the name of one of Los Angeles's most well-known recording studios. "A week of studio time has been arranged," Ozzy said. "Engineer included. You said 6 songs, right? A week is more than enough." Jake was staring at the card, but the letters had blurred because his eyes had filled with tears. "Ozzy, we can't accept this. It's too much." Ozzy placed his hand on Jake's shoulder. "Jake, this isn't me doing you a favor. This is me paying a debt I owe to music. I haven't felt what I felt tonight, singing with you lot, in a very long time." Chris and Marco had come over too. Both had heard everything. Chris wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Ozzy continued. "Sharon's going to make a few calls to some people she knows on your behalf. Small venues, clubs, maybe an opening act spot. I'm not making any promises, but Sharon's phone book is more powerful than my voice. That woman can move mountains with one phone call. And don't worry about the gear. I've got equipment sitting in storage that nobody's using." Jake couldn't hold it together anymore. He threw his arms around Ozzy, a tight, long, wordless embrace. As Ozzy was leaving the rusty note close to midnight, he stopped at the door. "Jake, I'll tell you one last thing. There are no guarantees in this business. Maybe your demo goes somewhere, maybe it doesn't. But tonight, while I was playing with you, those 40 people felt something. And if you can make people feel something, you're already a musician. Everything else is just details." Jake nodded. "We'll never forget this night for the rest of our lives." Ozzy shrugged with that crooked smile of his. "Neither will I, mate. I've walked onto stages in front of 60,000 people and felt nothing. Tonight I walked onto a stage in a room of 40 and remembered why I do this." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark streets of North Hollywood. 3 months later, on the first Monday in February, Midnight Revival stood in front of the studio door, looking at each other. All four of them had come. Jake looked at the business card in his hand one more time, then pushed the door open. The sound engineer waiting inside had never even heard the band's name, but he knew Ozzy had sent them. And that was enough. On the first day their fingers were shaking. Jake hit the wrong note twice, and every time Danny approached the microphone, he felt like his voice was about to give out. But on the morning of the second day, something changed. Chris lifted his drumsticks, Marco played the first note on the bass, and Jake remembered that night at the Rusty Note, the moment Ozzy took off his cap, that crooked smile, the words, "What you feel when you play." They recorded 6 songs in 5 days. Jake sent the demo to every record label in Los Angeles, every music editor, every blog writer. 37 emails, 37 hopes, and in the first week, 37 silences. The second week was silent, too. During the days, Jake sat in the seat of his forklift, checking his phone, his heart skipping a beat with every vibration. At the end of the third week, a reply came. A small independent label, Eastbound Records. It wasn't a big deal. There was no massive check, but they wanted to release the demo on digital platforms and offered to add the band to their roster. Midnight Revival's music was reaching beyond the walls of the Rusty Note for the first time, and Sharon's phone book hadn't stayed quiet either. The band started playing opening sets at several venues around Los Angeles, moving from rooms of 40 to rooms of 200. Jake hadn't been able to quit the forklift job yet, but now, even during the hours he spent in that forklift seat, there was a smile on his lips. Months later, Sharon talked about that night on a television show. When the host asked, "Does Ozzy still pull surprises like that?" Sharon laughed and shook her head. "You should have seen the look on Ozzy's face when he came home," she said. "This man has been taking the stage for 50 years, but that night he was glowing like he'd stepped on stage for the very first time. He said to me, 'Sharon, tonight I sang in a room of 40 people, and I felt like I was 21 again.' And I said, 'Ozzy, you've always stayed 21. It's just your body that doesn't know it.'" The host asked one more question. "Did you ever see the band again?" Sharon paused for a moment, her smile softening. "Ozzy never went back to that place," she said. "He didn't need to, because that little stage was inside him now, just like the back streets of Birmingham. The first rehearsals, the first songs have always been inside him. But we do follow the band, yes. Jake sends us a message every now and then." Throughout his career, Ozzy Osbourne filled Wembley, rocked Madison Square Garden, and took the stage in front of hundreds of thousands at Ozfest. But years later, when someone asked him, "What was your most unforgettable performance?" his answer was something nobody expected. Not a stadium, not a festival. A room of 40 people, a rusty plaque, a band whose amplifiers could cut out at any moment, and a Birmingham accent rising from a corner the stage lights could barely reach. On the night of November 3rd, 2018, the world didn't hear a thing. The news didn't write about it, the cameras didn't record it. But those 40 people in that small room, and everyone who heard the story afterwards, remembered what music really is.